Today we're going to be taking a look back at Davey Boy Smith's injury and hospitalization in 1999, and we're going to pair that with the No Mercy UK pay-per-view, and the Podski starts now.
The Podski with John Baker. For over 1 year, the revolutionary force in audio entertainment.
Ooh, yeah!
Brother,
Let me talk to you! Freak out, freak out!
I just had an out-of-body experience!
The insane in the membrane, for only one reason, and that's to take it to the limit, yeah!
Somebody stop the damn man!
Living on the edge.
Who is your daddy?
Hello and welcome to the Podski. I'm your host, Johnny Bake Show, and ringside with me is Teddy Mongoose. Today, we're going across the pond to Manchester, England, as we review WWF No Mercy UK. It was the No Mercy pay-per-view before No Mercy was officially coined later in 1999. So if you watched last week's episode, that is the May 10th, 1999 episode of Raw, which is also the highest rated Raw of all time. But that was actually the go-home show to No Mercy. So it's the perfect lead-in. Plus, No Mercy UK ties right into Over the Edge, which we briefly mentioned last week, and that is also what next week's show is. So if you are a new subscriber or a new viewer, please drop a like on this show. Let us know in the comments below if you're going to watch the show or what your thoughts are where we're at in 1999. If you are a returning subscriber, we do have something for you a little bit later. First, we have to give a huge shout out to Carlos Caval on YouTube. Thank you for checking out last week's episode. We hope you enjoyed today's episode too, Bretta. So thanks for watching.
All the way from Brazil. Viva Brazil.
Yes, Viva Brazil. I mentioned all this to segue into something for the subscribers. So we have a lot of new subscribers here to the channel, and we want to give you something new. When we hit certain milestones of subscribers, we're going to give you guys bonus episodes. And these bonus episodes are going to be bios of your favorite wrestlers of the past. And with the first subscriber reward, that'll be at 400 subscribers. When we hit it, the bonus episode you're going to get is a Ravishing Rick Rude episode. At 500 is Eddie Guerrero. 750 is Scott Hall. And then when we hit 1,000 subscribers, you're going to get the Macho Man bonus episode bio review. So we want to reward you listeners, that we want you guys to get involved and get invested into what we're doing here as well. So if you want this, hit the subscribe button and keep coming back for more of this awesome wrestling content. So Mongoose, do you want to take us through the idea behind these bonus shows and these subscriber rewards?
So the first sort of unlockable show that we did, and this was sort of a silent handshake between me and John, was if we got to 100 subscribers, that we would do a Road to WrestleMania show, which we did. And that was the deep dive where we went from basically the Royal Rumble to WrestleMania 20. We went week by week. John watched all the shows. I read all the observers, and we gave you like 2.5 hours of content. The idea moving forward isn't going to be something that deep, but rather more snackable content that is going to be wrestler-centric. And the reason for that is the Observer specifically has these excellent bios, especially for wrestlers that have passed, where Dave is going to take you through their beginning of the career through the end of the career. We will go through that. I will sort of make some clip notes. John will talk about some matches that he's seen. I'll talk about matches that I've seen. We can cross some notes, and we could sort of do a really interesting golden to new gen era guy versus attitude to ruthless era aggression guy. Compare and contrast to how our views and opinions are of this wrestler. And I think that it can be a really interesting retrospective of wrestlers that you have not yet heard. And we would love to give that to you. So please like, subscribe, comment, share it with your friends, because all those things help the algorithm. And the more subscribers, the more content that we give, because the more incentive that we have to spend the time that it takes to go through these things.
Yes, and if you like what we do here on the show today, this is going to be basically a mini spotlight that we're going to give you here of what a bonus show would look like. So before we hop into No Mercy UK, there was a promo done by Mick Foley on the show, and where he mentions Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog, and he's not only mentioned by Mick Foley, he's later mentioned by JR and Jerry Lawler too. So he's littered throughout this UK show. And I know that Teddy, you've been hounding me for weeks. We got to talk about Davey, especially where we're at in 1999. So I would love for you to give us the May of 1999 Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog update.
Here's what I'm going to do, John. I'm not going to give you May. I'm going to wind the clock back. All
Oh,
right.
yes.
I am. And I'm going to wind the clock back to January 25th, 1999. And the reason that I'm going to do this is, and to provide a little bit more perspective for where we're going here, we covered basically the road to WrestleMania 15. Go back in the archives, check that out. And during that time, I started to see things related to Davey. And especially when we did the Mania to Backlash show, there's a lot of meat on the bone with Davey Boy Smith. And I was basically just sort of texting John to say, dude, we got to talk about Davey Boy. And John not being privy to the information that I was going through, because John's our watcher and I'm the reader. I sort of understand where he was coming from of, okay, yeah, I guess we'll get to it. And then all of a sudden we crept up on this Manchester show and I told him, John, we have Davey Boy's from Manchester. We got to talk Davey Boy. And then John starts to watch the show. And the first thing he says to me is, oh my gosh, they're blowing up Davey Boy in this show. And so this all works out, man. And so I'm going to take us the whole way back to January 25th, 1999, Wrestling Observer newsletter. And the reason I'm doing that is Dave had noted, and this was something that I wanted to talk about during the WrestleMania 15 show. It just didn't make the cut. Dave had noted that there for several weeks he had heard about this Dynamite Kid. So Tom Billington, the Dynamite Kid, did an interview with a British wrestling magazine called Power Slam. Dave said, and I quote, "It was as good as I have been led to believe." So Dave was all in on this thing. So Dave says that Billington, who's 40 at the time, was paralyzed from the waist down and pretty much bedridden due to all of the damage that he sustained while being, quote, the craziest bump taker, end quote, in wrestling in the late 70s through the early 80s. Dave also called him one of the best workers ever and said that every wrestler under 215 pounds, which has made it, should thank him for paving the way by putting junior heavyweights in the spotlight in Japan. And that match quality then makes its way over to the US in later years. So the big takeaways that I had from this interview, and here I'm not quoting Dave anymore, and I'm paraphrasing what Dave said that Tom Billington said, is that when asked if he would change anything based on his condition now, he said, and he being Tom Billington, the Dynamite Kid, quote, "I would never change a thing because I loved wrestling. So no, I would not change anything. I love the excitement. I love my opponents, whether good or bad. Really, I mean this. I would do this again." He then knocked his cousin Davey Boy, who hasn't talked to in 8 years, and said he'd never speak to him again. This came from Smith, quote, telling lies behind his back, his being the Dynamite Kid, to Dynamite's aunt and uncle about his drug use, end quote, and then claimed that Diana Smith tried to screw up his deal with All Japan. So Dynamite starts throwing some heat in this interview.
Yeah, and that's really interesting about the drug use thing, because I read Bret Hart's book, and Bret Hart specifically mentions how bad of drugs that Billington was using. He talked about Dynamite Kid for that whole first half of that book. It is a great read, but it's weirdly Dynamite Kid heavy in the first half.
Well, John, we're going to get to Dynamite's drug use in a minute, because this is almost, the way that this reads is almost like, you know, the Rick James, Charlie Murphy, Pell show. Yeah, you know, I never hit Charlie Murphy or whatever. And they'd be like, yeah, I hit Charlie Murphy, I hit him across the face or whatever. Like, that's sort of because we go from him being mad at Davey Boy because he essentially told his parents, hey, I got problems with this Dynamite's drug use, and we'll go on. Before we do, Dynamite did have some funny things to say about Hulk Hogan. He did say, and these are direct Dynamite quotes, quote, "A great man, always laughed and grinned, shook your hand, but he was only in it for himself. Don't get me wrong. I love Hulk Hogan very much, but he was only in it for himself, end quote. So he basically was saying that Hulk was a great guy, but it was the Hulk show, which we've heard forever. Hulk must pose, right?
Yep.
He also said that they asked him to rate Hulk Hogan, and instead he said, I'm going to rate his opponents, and I would give Hulk's opponents a 9, and I would give Hulk a 1 on a 1 to 10 scale. But the thing is that he didn't knock his ability to draw money.
Well,
real recognizes real, man, and he was on those shows with him. And so he was basically saying, we brought in brothers to come in and bump around up, down, left, and right to make this guy look great. And they did it. And basically Hulk had to, 1 punch, 2 punch, 3 punch into the ropes, leg drop, boot leg drop pose. And so that was where his issue, quote unquote, was with that. But I didn't take this at all as a burial, more so as a, hey, tell us about this Hulk Hogan guy. What do you think? And he was like, yeah, he was good, but like there were people out there doing all the work. So here's the crazy part of this interview. So he, in regards to steroids, he says he started taking steroids in 1978 when JYD gave him some pills in Germany. He then started shooting them in Canada. He said that he knew he had to take them or he'd never get a job in wrestling. Off of steroids, Dynamite said that he could only get to 180 pounds. On steroids, he was 225. So for simple math, for people that can't get there, 45 extra pounds. And so the way the human body works is you are genetically predisposed to only have so much muscle mass on your frame at one time. And when you add 45 pounds on a slighter frame, that'll sort of get us to where we're going to go here with him because, he ends up in a pretty bad way. He took 1,200 milligrams of steroids. That was, Dave notes, injectable testosterone and Dianabol, which is 6 shots a day, 3 into each buttock cheek. So 6 shots a day, 3 into each cheek. Now, Dave also notes mild steroid users take 1 shot every 7 to 10 days. Sizable users take 2 a week, and, quote, out of control guys, end quote, take 1 every day. So Dynamite 6 times that.
Jeez.
He also admits.
No wonder he was paralyzed.
Well, and here's the thing. He also admits to cocaine, amphetamines, marijuana, and claimed that none of the others from that era would admit it, but the majority of the people that he was with were on the same drugs. He also said that he was spending $1,200 per week on hotels, beers, and drugs.
Oh, my word.
Folks, $1,200 a week in 2024 money is insane. That's a mortgage payment in 2024 money. Dynamite is spending that in the 80s on those things.
Wow.
And we bring that up because it was this random story that was put into the January 25th Observer, the same Observer that had the Shawn Michaels story. So go back to that 99 WrestleMania show. A lot of meat on the bone there. And we now fast forward to April 12th, 1999. So, John, the date of our UK show is...
I believe it is May 16th.
So 1 month before the UK show, Dave starts writing about Davey Boy Smith. And so Dave says that Davey Boy Smith, who was 36 years old at the time, is suffering from an undiagnosed infection in his spine, which could be a staph infection. And as of last reports late on 4/5, April 5th, was in intensive care at Rocky View Hospital in Calgary. This is a very tough time for Davey Boy. His sister Tracy, which this is the famous sister that sort of went back to the Shawn Michaels Insurrection, I believe it was, UK show.
Yes.
Where, and we'll get to that, where Shawn basically overrides Davey Boy going over after he promised his dying sister that he was going to win. So Davey Boy's sister Tracy dies of cancer in November of 98. His mother dies of cancer in February 99. And then Davey took ill a few weeks later, and then he was sure that he was the next in line. So Davey Boy was crippled in recent weeks with both back and abdominal pains and had dropped 40 pounds. He was absolutely, and I guess that was one of those sort of, writings on the wall. This is what I've seen. This is what I've been through. Davey Boy was insistent that he had cancer. Tests determined that it was not cancer, but the doctors were stumped at the time. So Davey Boy's back hasn't been the same since being slammed on a trapdoor on a nitro taping when the Warrior was working for the company. We'll get to that. On March 29th, Smith's daughter noticed a large lump on his back, and he was taken to the hospital, and then doctors determined that the lump was a bone infection, which was spreading through his body. Doctors at the time prescribed aggressive antibiotics as treatment, but after tests on March 31st, the doctors determined the initial treatments weren't working and increased the dosages. So I pause here, and the reason I pause here is that I actually had a friend when I was in high school that, and this was the early 2000s, this wasn't even 99, that was in a similar situation, and like he thought he was going to die. It ended up being MRSA.
Wow.
And we don't get to MRSA here, spoiler alert, but I wonder if this wasn't MRSA before MRSA was a thing.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you said like staph infection in the
Right.
back, sweaty dudes.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot.
Yes. And my friend was he was a college athlete. He just went to school, and football practice, all these things. And then he had this infection in his lower body and they couldn't figure out anything. And reading this really sort of, memory holds me there to be like, oh my gosh. And they had no idea, man. And they were giving him antibiotics that were like, top tier. But we find out that MRSA has its own sort of treatment protocol. And reading this is what that reminds me of. So I'm thinking that this could have been MRSA before MRSA. I don't know. Lim said that Smith would be hospitalized for a minimum of 6 weeks and that it was too early to know whether or not he would ever be able to return to wrestling, but he's out a minimum of 4 months. Later that week, as his pain described as the feeling of having a knife in the back 24 hours a day worsened, the estimates were that he'd be hospitalized closer to 3 months. So the crazy thing with this is Davey Boy is still under contract with WCW. And people forget this, that he went to WCW post Screwjob, and we'll get to that.
That was my thought initially when I'm watching the show. I was like, they're talking about Davey Boy, but Davey Boy is a WCW superstar, and they're actively talking about him on a WWF show, and they're in the middle of the war. Like,
correct.
That is what I thought was so interesting about all of this.
Correct. And so he's still under contract, hasn't worked in months. And Dave says that he's seen his career take a major turn for the worst after the back and knee problems. Dave says that it's probably the culmination of 20 years in the ring, with the problems really taking their toll dating back to the summer of 1997. So from the April 19th, 99 Observer, Smith is still in the ICU in Calgary with a yet undiagnosed spinal infection that to this point is considered almost certainly career-ending and even potentially life-threatening. He was scheduled to undergo a second spinal tap this week to drain the fluid from his spine to keep both the infection from going to the brain and to attempt to get a diagnosis of what the infection really is. And that sounds murky, but get ready for this, dude. So the infection is both very painful and not responding to treatment. Was also diagnosed as having a crushed C9 and C10 disc in his back vertebrae and has 4 fractured discs, which at this point look to necessitate career-ending back surgery to place titanium in his back, which is what Shawn Michaels was trying to avoid at that time.
Yeah, well, it's no wonder he's in back pain with all of this damage, let alone the infection.
Well, this doesn't get better.
Oh my God.
It's not a funny matter, but I'm like, this doesn't get better. The infection also has resulted in his veins collapsing, so he is, at press time, having to be fed with an IV.
How is there more on Davey Boy at this point? Like, how much more can this guy take?
Smith was given the word on April 11th that there's a chance that he will have to live the rest of his life in a wheelchair, which brings to mind the potential sad irony of the possibility that both members of the British Bulldogs, the other being the Dynamite Kid, Tom Billington, which we had just talked about from January.
Yes.
One of the greatest in-ring performers in history, and as a unit, the most innovative tag team ever, living the rest of their lives in wheelchairs before the age of 40. So remember, Billington is in a wheelchair at 40. Smith is 36 years old, undiagnosed spinal infection. Nobody knows what's going on, and he's 36 years old. And so the reality is that this team that walked out there with Matilda, with Captain Lou, that had the LGNs, that had all this stuff, is both going to be wheelchair ridden before their 40th birthday.
Like, that's unbelievable. Especially if you tied both of those in there. Like, it's I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about it is that not only are they going to be in wheelchairs, or potentially in wheelchairs, that Dynamite specifically, who actually was in the wheelchair. All right, Davey Boy's story in the short term ends happily.
Yes.
Dynamite's does not.
No, right.
But these were the guys, and Dynamite specifically, that set the standard for what we watch now.
Right.
Which is crazy.
It is. And considering that they would have like literally have been in wheelchairs before like guys even are hitting their prime now.
Correct. And I'm really glad you said that, because one of the big things that should be noted, and this line stood out to me, this was from like an Observer Radio or something a while ago, is that, and I don't remember if it was Meltzer himself or Meltzer talking to somebody else, but basically what that was they were saying that in the 80s, in the 90s, 70s, whatever the decade was, that the boys in the back were smoking cigarettes, pounding beers, doing whatever. And the boys in the back now, they're on their phones and they're on Twitch and they're playing video games. And the athlete that you see is very different, because what defines quote unquote, the manly man is shifted from, I could drink 100 beers to I could beat you in Halo. Do you know what I mean? And so like, it's really wild how that works. And I'm sure that a million people will feel a million different ways about that. But in reality, for the wrestling world, it's a good thing.
Yes, it is a very good thing, considering a lot of the stuff that even you read in these autobiographies of how these people lived their day-to-day lives, like sitting in cars all day long and like living the hardest of lives. I can't imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. So we go to this week's hashtag, That's So WCW. Okay. So in probably the single most classless move in company history, Diane Myers of WCW Legal FedEx Smith his termination notice effective immediately on April 5th, which arrived at his father-in-law's home the next day, which was brought to him in the ICU.
Wow.
WCW used the 90-day injury clause, whereas if a wrestler is unable to perform for 90 days, the company has the right to rescind their contract, to terminate his contract, which had approximately 2 years remaining.
WCW did this so many times to people. How many people over the years did they do this to? They did it to Stonecold. They did it to X-Pac. They did it to Bulldog here. Like, there's so many dudes that they did this to.
I know. And the bad thing is that it's not like the joke through the mid 2000s until through the teens was the future endeavored, right? Because WWE did the same thing, right? Hey, here's your future endeavor. Good luck, your future endeavors. But this is cold, and WCW is like notoriously cold for this. You brought up Stone Cold, literally, I guess that ties in pretty nice here. But we got more. So there were internet rumors at the time that Smith had been let go, the provision of his contracts were changed, or that he may have been WWF bound, but all of those are untrue. There were talks of him flying to Toronto for the March 29th Nitro, and then putting him on television for an interview just to let everybody know that he was basically still under contract. I still work here. I'm okay. I'm just hurt. But
that's so WCW.
As it turned out, The WCW never sent tickets to Smith to Toronto. The thing is, this actually works out because he goes to the hospital 2 days later. So in a happy accident, he was supposed to go there. WCW doesn't send the tickets. He does end up in the hospital. So it's a happy accident in that way. So there's a Calgary Sun article in the past week that talked about Smith potentially suing WCW over the termination because the injury occurred due to unsafe working environments because of the ring with the trapdoor that several wrestlers were injured from, and they basically didn't know about it ahead of time. And the idea was to keep the warrior mystique alive, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the whole deal there, was they were wrestling in a ring that had a trap door that they weren't smartened up to, and there were more than him ended up injured because of the bumps. So Davey Boy's contract at this time was believed to be in the mid six figures, and we'll get into contract stuff later. But I do want to note before we move on, Davey Boy paid $150,000 out of his own pocket. So Davey Boy himself paid $150,000 out of his own pocket to Titan Sports to get out of his WWF deal because he was so distraught after the Screwjob. After he left, though, he was basically crippled, and this is Dave's words, crippled by a series of knee injuries in his final years with Titan Sports. And as a result of 20 years of wear and tear and everything else that he went through, never had a good match in WCW. So Dave says that while his termination was inevitable, being that his career is likely finished, we'll get there.
Huh?
And this does make me feel really bad because when he came back in 99, I was just like, dude, get this guy off my screen. You know, he's past his prime.
Exactly.
Total guy, like just trying to hold on to the glory days.
I'm sure beautiful Bobby Winters has the same sentiments.
Right, man. And I just feel so bad because I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought the worst things about this guy being on TV, and I had no idea he was going through any of this.
Yeah.
And then he ends up coming back from this, which, like, if you put Davey Boy then into Davey Boy now, huge baby face, man.
Oh my word, he would have been an enormous baby face.
Yeah, huge baby face. I couldn't imagine the people that are going to be rooting for him. His social medias would have been insane with the comeback, with everything else. Long time.
That is perfect because if he would have been in this day, in this era of wrestling, he would have been revered as a hero because
Right.
everything that happened to him, he would have been the ultimate baby face, and we just didn't have his back then.
No.
A totally different time.
No, and he was brought back as a loser.
Yeah.
And that sucks. They didn't try to, but he was, right?
Right.
And that's so unfair, man. And that one hurts me to think about how I felt about him then versus reading this now, right? Dave says that nothing could be more classless than the manner and the timing of how it was handled by WCW. And fun little side tangent here. This even tops when the company fired Ricky Steamboat, one of the hardest working and best in-ring performers of all time, who is noted as one of the few veterans who went out of their way to help young wrestlers improve. And he suffered a career-ending injury while in a match with Steve Austin. WCW wasn't only classless to Steamboat in that regard, but also to fans, as they attempted to keep the injury quiet as to not let fans know a rematch with Austin on the upcoming pay-per-view wasn't going to take place as advertised, even after they knew that Steamboat's career was likely over. John, do you know what match I'm talking about?
I don't know. Which one are you talking about?
I am talking about the match where Ricky Steamboat was replaced by Hacksaw Jim Duggan at Fall Brawl. At Fall Brawl 1994.
Dude, this is the U.S. title match, isn't it? Or the TV?
It is. John, Austin and Steamboat were in the middle of a blood feud. Those two have a match, and if we can find it, please link it to the YouTube.
Yes.
They have a Clash of the Champions 20 match that is incredible. It's incredible, man. Steamboat wins it. That show is important because that's also Andre the Giant's last television appearance.
Okay.
So he's there. This feud also gives us Steamboat and Shane Douglas versus the Hollywood Blondes. Like, this wasn't just a singles deal. This was something that expanded out, and it was excellent. And they basically, once Steamboat was hurt, they swept it under the rug, had Austin lose to Duggan because Hogan was there now, and Austin was getting pushed down the card.
Yes.
And they just moved on. The crazy thing with that,
look at how dumb they are, especially in 1999, looking at where Austin is.
well, this all took place a few months before his contract was set to expire in the first place, but instead, the company received word that he wasn't going to be able to perform anymore, he being Steamboat. And so he was terminated immediately, and then the two sides ended up in court. Again, that's so WCW, man. Like, just let his contract run out. You know, I'm by no means, I don't run a wrestling business, but you would think just let it go.
It's not like they didn't have the money to do it, especially for somebody that's injured this bad. Just let it run out.
Right. That leads us into basically the Davey Boy career retrospective. So Davey Boy grew up in Manchester, England, which is where No Mercy is going to come to you from in the 90s. He became known as the British Bulldog and had a largely successful career that began for Max and Shirley Crab Cheese Joint Promotions in England in the spring of 1978 as a 15-year-old. There is a little bit of a synchronicity there we'll get into later. He soon became a phenom in that country, working in televised matches, was a tag team partner with the country's biggest star, Big Daddy, which I've never seen a Big Daddy match, but I've heard Big Daddy 1,000 times. So Davey Boy was his tag team partner. I would assume that this is the equivalent of like the Edge and Hogan tag team from the early 2000s.
Yes.
As typical as it was in those days, the top British stars would eventually get a chance to tour for Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling promotion. So Smith came to Calgary from England in 1981. By the time that he arrived in Canada, his cousin Dynamite was already considered one of the top performers in the company and also considered as many as one of the best pound-for-pound performers in the world. The Calgary promotion had its ties to New Japan Wrestling with Dynamite Kid, Bret Hart, and Davey Boy, which I should note, Davey Boy arrived in Canada at the age of 18, and he weighed less than 200 pounds. We'll get to that because Davey Boy was very much not 200 pounds for a long time. Revolutionized lighter-weight wrestling in some 15 years before WCW coined the phrase cruiserweights. So this was cruiserweights before cruiserweights, brought to you by Stampede Wrestling, man. Innovators once again.
It's Stu Hart, and you got some for the big bastard.
You need a big bastards if you're going to be having these little bastards rolling around here. Guaranteed Davey got stretched a couple of times in the dungeon now.
Oh,
guaranteed. So here's what I need to say this one. Davey Boy made a sensational debut in Japan in late 1983 as the Masked Vampire.
That's a great name.
Well, that will be my first name. The Masked Vampire, unmasked as Theodore Mongoose. Seriously, very fast. But before I get unmasked, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to try to suck the energy out of my opponent. That's what I'm going to do. This is great, man. So he went against Cobra, which was not the same Cobra that we would see at mid-90s WCW. I wish it was, but it wasn't. And unmasked in the ring that night, for the rest of the decade, he and Dynamite Kid are considered one of the top tag teams in the world, working for New Japan, and then All Japan, WWF, and then Stampede Wrestling as well. So in 84, Davey Boy marries Diana Hart of the famous Calgary wrestling family. At about the same time, Vince McMahon purchased Stampede Wrestling from Stu Hart, and I love this, dude. As part of the deal, Hart's top three stars, Bret, Dynamite, and Davey Boy, went to work for the WWF as prelim wrestlers without a push. What ended up happening is the Bulldogs quit WWF. They go to Japan. They're brought back a few months later. The crazy thing with this is that Vince signed them right before they were about to sign with Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling. They were going to feud with the Rock and Roll Express, and that probably would have been a huge deal in the 80s.
Yes, it probably would have been enormous.
Yeah, and so right then, brought him in. This, at the time, is that rock and wrestling connection Go back and check the shows. But that Rock and Wrestling Connection, where things are really starting to ramp up, and they're coined the British Bulldogs, merchandising increases, all that. Dynamite's back goes out in 86, though, with an injury that should have been career ending. And have you heard of this one? Because this is a famous wrestling story that because Dynamite's back goes out, when they drop the belts to the Hart Foundation, in that match, they literally carry Dynamite up to the ring and put him on the apron, and Davey Boy works the whole match and then loses, and then they're done. Like they carried Dynamite to and from the ring because his back was so bad.
Wow. I actually didn't know that.
Yes. Dave says that it was a sickening scene, but that is sort of a famous story from that time. Dynamite eventually returns. Dave said that he was a good performer, but he and the team were never the same after the back injury. And basically, that injury was what confined him to the wheelchair later. The Bulldogs then, because Dynamite couldn't go the way he could, the Bulldogs then quit the WWF, and then they went back to All Japan. So that was where sort of Dynamite had his swan song. The Bulldogs, I have noted, were noted for their outside the ring antics, as well as their in the ring talents, which the parties, ribs, all that other jazz. The drug use we noted before with Dynamite. And then there's all sorts of famous stories with Dynamite ribs, which then I guess sort of gets carried on by Owen to a less brutal extent. You know, Owen seemed to be much more kind-hearted, where Dynamite seems to really be a dick.
Yes.
For no better way to put it. Then we have here that the less than amicable split during an angle in Calgary to break up the team in the dying days of the territory left the two cousins wound up hating each other in real life, and then they haven't spoken with one another in many years. So their working breakup angle actually sort of mirrored their real life. You know, we had a falling out, which sucks, man. I mean, they, family members and everything else.
Right.
After the demise of Dynamite's career due to injuries, Smith became a singles wrestler called the British Bulldog, gained major fame as the top drawing card in the UK. So after Kid's career ends due to injuries, Dynamite Kid's career, Smith becomes a single star named the British Bulldog. He comes to major fame. Kid's not happy about it, but the WWF, even though it starts to sort of go down in popularity in the States, is rising overseas. So Davey Boy is like the perfect baby face to have here.
Yeah.
His most famous singles match. Go ahead, John.
I believe we covered it here on the show already. It is the SummerSlam 92 Intercontinental Championship versus Bret Hart.
You better believe it, man. 78,000 fans, wins his first singles championship, Intercontinental Championship. Dave Meltzer says that he's plagued with a staph infection in his knee. And we've heard many times that Davey Boy was plagued by much more than a staph infection in his knee at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, we know that one all too well. We talked about that. You can go back and check that out in the archives. That SummerSlam 92 retrospective is deep into the archives.
Yes, sir. So he loses the belt then to Shawn Michaels on a Saturday Night's Main Event. Shawn counters the superplex into a pin. At that time, this is when I was really starting to watch. I was gobsmacked that Davey lost. And I gained some perspective in learning that at the peak of his popularity, he was fired by the WWF, allegedly because Vince McMahon was attempting to clean up the company due to all the negative publicity regarding steroids. We have a 1993 steroid trial, so Vince is trying to clean house, and Davey Boy happens to be part of the collateral damage there. So get ready for this one. In a lawsuit filed by Jim Hellwig, he claimed that Davey Boy Smith's weight peaked at 275 pounds on a 5'10" frame. In recent years, Dave Meltzer says his weight was closer to 245 pounds, making things easier on his knees. But he and Hellwig were fired because McMahon believed that they were somehow involved with HGH usage for the boys to beat steroid tests, a claim that Hellwig and Smith both denied was true, but both admitted to being told about the accusation as the reason for their dismissal. So this is literally with the SummerSlam 92 Warriors there. He's gone for Survivor Series 92. if you remember any of that, that's the Ultimate Maniacs deal where then we get Mr. Perfect is now teaming with Macho. So there's a whole bunch of cards that fall in relation to this. Smith spends a few years in WCW, and I do need to note a couple of awesome highlights. He debuted at Super Bowl III at February 21st, 1993. He defeated Wild Bill Irwin. He then teams with Sting, Podski Doc, where you at? As the superpowers. They feuded with Sid Vicious and Vader. Sid Vicious and Vader were the masters of the power bomb. Davey Boy defeats Vader at Slamboree 93. He wins that match via DQ, so he doesn't win the title. And then that summer, John, we are treated to some of the most beautiful wrestle crap magic that you have ever seen. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Is that the movie? The mini?
It is the mini movie. It is the mini movie, man. So this mini movie, if you have not seen, and John, if you could please throw our people a link down in the description.
Yes.
This mini movie involves a little person who was hired by Colonel Rob Parker, Sid Vicious, and Vader to blow up Sting and Davey Boy's party boat.
Yep.
The little person wears a shark fin on his back to swim out there, ties up, and then detonates a bomb. Davey Boy saves Sting from being blown up by said planted bomb. And then we get a tag team match, which we talked last week, dude. Settle in the ring.
Yeah.
Settle it. You want to blow me up? Settle it in the ring.
Yes.
I love it. I love it forever. So with that Beach Blast tag team match, Sting and Davey Boy win. Davey Boy pins Vader. As a result, Davey Boy earns a title shot versus Vader at Clash of the Champions 24. And this is very, very famous, not for the main event that featured Davey Boy and Vader, but for a Flair of the Gold segment where Harlem Heat get revealed to be Vicious and Vader's tag partners against the team of Sting, Davey Boy, and Dustin Rhodes. They have a mystery partner. Their mystery partner is revealed as
Shockmaster?
Oh, baby.
Oh.
So at Clash of the Champions 24, where I believe that it's in August. I think it's in August, might be September of 93. We see Vicious, Vader, and Kane and Cole from Harlem Heat. Not Stevie Ray and Booker T, but Kane and Cole come out with Colonel Rob Parker, and they are giving the business to Sting and Davey Boy. And their partner reveal is going to be shocking. And we're treated to the Shockmaster, to which Davey Boy says, and I quote, fell on his fucking arse. John, one of our favorite wrestling memories together is a War Games match. That was the Wolfpack versus the Black and White.
I love that. War Games 98. Fall Brawl 98.
So this feud culminates with a War Games match where we have the babyface team of Sting and Dustin Rhodes and the Shockmaster and Davey Boy Smith defeating the Master of the Powerbomb, Harlem Heat, in 16 minutes and 39 seconds. I did not go back and watch War Games from Fall Brawl in 1994, but brother, this is a 16-minute and 39-second War Game match. I need to see what happens here.
I absolutely need to go back and see that too, because that doesn't make that logically does not make sense.
No, it had to be instead.
Even
I guess the only thing could be, and again, please don't smash us in the comments because we haven't seen it. Actually, smash us if you want to. I guess just let us know.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that there wasn't the 2 minute, 90 seconds, 1 minute, whatever the intervals might have been, and then the match beyond, just for the sake of time. And if it was, then it literally had to be intervals. Okay, get your shit in pin.
Yeah. I feel like I need to see it now.
Yeah. I'm in. So Davey Boy comes back to the WWF. The plan here is to build him with European shows, have him as the European heavyweight champion, use him a drawing card that way. So Dave said, and I want to read this whole quote. While Smith was one of the most physically talented performers ever in the profession, combining uncanny agility with almost freakish power, combined with his strong wrestling background, he was terribly inconsistent in the ring. On certain nights, he would be as good a performer as there was in the business, such as big junior heavyweight matches early on in Japan and the US. And then he goes on to note the Wembley match, the Vader WCW matches, as both Slamboree and Clash of Champions all being great. So he's giving him credit for a singles performer. He also says that upon returning to the WWF, that his December 17th, 1995 Classic, challenging Bret Hart for a WWF title match in Hershey, PA,
Shout
In
out.
Your House.
Shout
Out. At In Your House was, Dave says, quote, easily the best WWF match of that year. And so
wow.
I got to go back, man. I've seen it. I know I saw it then. I know I saw it on Watchbacks, but I'm reading this. I got to go back and see this, brother.
Yes.
He also notes his February 26, 97 European title final against Owen Hart. He then says, because of these great matches, particularly in later years, they were almost frustrating to management because when he wasn't motivated, the matches were at the other end of the spectrum. So he could be great when he wants to be great, and when he's not great, his good isn't good enough. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I did note that Dave glosses over the Allied Powers, which I took serious, I took problem with here because I love the Allied Powers as a tag team. So Dave goes straight from WCW to him facing Bret and then Owen for the World and European Championships. What he doesn't mention is the Allied Powers formed on January 2nd, 1995 on a Monday Night Raw. So Lex Luger is feuding with the $1 Million Corporation. Davey Boy is brought in basically as like a babyface heater to help him out. Those two then form up and they're going to take down the corporation. They defeated the Blue Brothers in the opening match of WrestleMania 11. They also defeated teams like Men on a Mission, Well Done, the Heavenly Bodies, Jeff Jarrett and the Roadie. So basically, and just in reading this sounds to me a lot like TV matches, house show matches, baby faces go over, everybody cheers.
Yeah.
They did, however, have a few World Tag title matches. And the one that I remembered was the In Your House 2 match. Yoko beats Luger with a leg drop. So there was a Allied Powers versus Yoko and Owen tag title match. Yoko wins. And the bad thing with this storyline is that it looks like they had an idea. Davey Boy turns heel in August of 95. He attacks Diesel. Diesel was a stand-in for Luger, who was out with a, quote, family emergency that night, end quote. So he attacks the babyface champion, and we think we have something set up. And then Lex jumps ship to Nitro in September of 95 on that first Nitro, and the Allied Power storyline is over. So RIP to that, but that's one that I hold close to the vest there. So Dave does note that after all of that, probably his last memorable match, him being Davey Boy, was in Birmingham, England on September 20th, 1997, when, already plagued by a very bad knee, Davey Boy lost the European title to Shawn Michaels in a great match after literally being told of the result at the last minute. So Michaels turned down the original finish of Bulldog going over clean in his own country with the idea that it would be building to a major rematch that he would win over Michaels in a few months, he being Davey Boy, would win over Michaels in a few months in his hometown of Manchester, which turned out to be even more historically significant since it never took place.
Mm-hmm.
So this was just Shawn being Shawn.
Yes.
And so all the things that I say about, I wish that I knew this about Davey Boy then, Shawn Michaels is my favorite wrestler ever, dude. If I'd have known all these Shawn Michaels things then, there's no chance that I would have I'd have hated the ground Shawn walked on. You know what I mean?
Yes, you would have hated him.
Absolutely, dude. So basically, if people don't know the story, Davey Boy's sister is diagnosed with cancer. She is She passes away shortly thereafter. She passed away in 1998. Davey Boy dedicates the match to her and does that publicly. And this is all because he's going to win. And then they get to England, and then he finds out he is going to lose, and his family is irate, as is he. But Davey Boy does business. And look, man, there's a lot to say about a guy that does business, right? Like,
Yes.
it's a pretty admirable quality. So he works through the chronic knee pain, and it gets injured worse after an event in November of 97. Get to that. Although McMahon proclaimed the New Heart Foundation without Brett would give Owen and Bulldog a chance to become the stars that they could outside of Brett's long shadow, which was holding them back, Smith was very upset and then never wrestled another match for the WWF at this point in time.
Wow.
Hashtag that's so Vince.
That is so Vince at this. Man, he just fucked everybody over.
That's the way you do it, man.
Yeah.
So we now are at the April 26th Observer newsletter. We are getting better here. Davey Boy is going stir crazy in the Calgary hospital, attempting to start battling back after the worst year of his life. So with this, the antibiotics are beginning to work his spinal infection, which was diagnosed as a staph infection. There was some question as to how much damage was done to the spine by the infection before the antibiotics started working. He has been placed in a body cast.
A body cast?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And the idea here is because of the fractured spine and the crushed vertebrae, the body cast is going to help alleviate some of that.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And this was the sad thing here is that this back injury, which may have started all of this, is still being tied to the bump from the 9/13 pay-per-view match with himself and Jim Neidhart facing Disco Inferno and Alex Wright.
Of course. Fuck Disco Inferno.
So since that match, Smith wrestled a few more matches, but was so spooked by his back pain that he couldn't take anything ever other than carefully mistimed bumps on his side, and then eventually couldn't perform at all. And so here's where we run into Davey Boy's worst year ever. He's losing a painkiller battle to the addiction that he has, and he didn't realize he had it until his wife overdoses on painkillers herself. And we'll get to that in a second. This is a really morbid story, but basically this makes him check into rehab right after Christmas. Also in this time, his son breaks his arm in amateur wrestling. He's diagnosed with a series of upper back injuries, including the fractured spine that threaten his career, possibility of living his life in a wheelchair. He's fired from his job while in the hospital. He loses his mother. He loses his sister. And then over the past weekend, there is a story on him that basically exaggerates the condition and makes it out like he's never going to walk again. So they do have him being, the tabloid story is he's down and out before he's down and out. And so he's hearing it from all places and sources. Could you imagine if he had a cell phone at this point in time, man?
You would have had to log up everything. You would have just had to turn your phone off.
I couldn't begin to think about what that stressor would have added, right?
Yes.
So we have that he was speaking earlier about doing a Shawn Michaels type of situation where Shawn wasn't going to be wrestling anymore. Covered that back in the archives. He wanted to avoid back surgery to repair the break in his spine by putting titanium there that would have eliminated him ever from working again. He's talking of hoping to spend time in a body cast to heal the back enough that he'll be able to return to the ring. It should be noted that in 1990, Davey Boy's doctors suggested back surgery, which at the time would have ended his career, but he was able to return and wrestle for almost a decade afterwards. And here's where we're going to close our little Davey Boy chapter here. And Dave's segue is this story starts like every other story with a November 9th, 1997 happening in Montreal. But this is basically Davey Boy's life after the screw job. So Davey Boy says, I was very happy working for the WWF up to that time with the Hart Foundation. I thought the angle was going really strong. A few days before the match, he said that he was aware that there was problems with his brother-in-law and Vince McMahon, and then that led to the match, the movie, The Myth. He recalled that Bret was talking to Eric Bischoff at the time. He made it clear that he didn't care what Bret did in regards to the finish, and he wanted to make it clear that no matter what the offer was, that Bret was going to WCW, he made it clear that no matter what happened in WWF, the offer to WCW was ironclad. So it didn't matter if he lost, if he won, if he anything else like that. Bret's deal was ironclad. He was going to WCW. Davey Boy then says, quote, "So they screwed Bret. He spit on Vince. I got in the ring. I was supposed to be in the run-in-ish finish. And when I first got out there, I thought it was a big work, but I got into the ring and Bret said, no, Vince really fucked me. I said, that's bullshit. He went to the dressing room and he was talking to Shawn. Vince came out and Vince insisted on seeing Bret. Bret told me to tell Vince that if he comes in, I'm going to punch him. Vince said that it was business decision and he insisted on seeing him. And what happens, John?
Bret Hart stands up and punches the hell out of Vince McMahon.
Bret punched him in the face. So after Hart punched McMahon, Shane McMahon jumped on Hart and Smith tried to break things up, which injured his already bad knee in the process. Upset over what happened, Smith wound up in an argument with McMahon a few weeks later, where McMahon offered to let him out of his contract. Davey Boy agreed when Eric Bischoff offered him a substantial raise, believed to be from about $250,000 a year to $400,000 a year for a 3-year deal. Although McMahon insisted on being paid $150,000 to let Smith out of the deal, which he and WCW split in paying off. So
Gotcha.
He was allowed to go, but he had to pay his way out. Davey Boy claims that Bischoff told him he was going to do a British Bulldog marketing video. Bischoff then reneged on that and said, if I let you do it, I have to let everybody else do it. And then Dave says, looking back, while realizing that McMahon did screw his brother-in-law, he wished that Hart would have just agreed to lose the match so none of this would have ever taken place. He says that Davey Boy never got off the ground in WCW. He was working the opener in the Fall Brawl show, which was the show that John and I look back so affectionately on with the Warrior show up. But that was actually the show that Davey Boy got injured on. The promotion was doing a, quote, magic act finish where the Warrior was going to come up. Dave says it flopped anyways. Dave then says that due to the pain, Smith started to use painkillers to mask it. He says that Davey Boy says, quote, my work was getting worse. My stomach was all blown up like a basketball and I didn't know why, end quote there. Dave notes that Davey Boy was into Xanax, Percocets, Demerol, and then eventually morphine to counter the pain. Dave also notes that he was once noted for holding up and power slamming and suplexing people like Vader. Now he couldn't even hold up Disco Inferno for a power slam. Then Davey Boy takes a break. WCW keeps him on salary, cuts his pay by 30%. In November, he receives word about his sister being in bad shape. He goes to England to see her. She already passes away. There is a story about Davey Boy's wife, Diana, taking 100 Xanaxes to prove a point to him that he needs to go to rehab, which he then does. Rehab is a terrible experience. And while in rehab, he then starts to have the pains that end up with him having this back issue. And so Davey Boy is released from the hospital on April 21st. He's in a full body cast. He now has a catheter tube placed in him every morning and has a nurse coming in every day to take care of him. Eric Bischoff has called his lawyers since there's a threat of a lawsuit over the termination and has claimed that he had no idea that Smith was hurt as bad as he was and that people had told him that Smith wasn't even really hurt. Davey Boy's plans at the time were to tag with his son Harry, who is now 13 years old. WCW did continue to pay him afterwards, after the termination notice. And this would have been from the May 10th Observer. Dave notes that WCW does continue to pay him as sort of a make good after the previous issue. However, Dave notes that there is a correction here, that the two sides settled at $100,000 for Davey Boy's let out of his WWF contract. and that was split between Davey Boy and WCW. So Davey Boy had to pay $50,000 to get out of his WWF deal, and then we are where we are. So we wrap up with Davey Boy. He returns to the WWF in September 1999, which is where we get the Rock feud. On Raw on October 11th, 99, he gets thrown into the dog feces, which that is a famous, beautiful Bobby Winters note. He wrestles the Rock at No Mercy 99, the US version. It receives a 3.68 rating on Cage Match. Dave Meltzer gives it a 1-star rating. His last match for the WWF was against Eddie Guerrero on Sunday Night Heat in May 2000. The match ended in a double DQ, and then he wrestles his last match on May 11th, 2002. He teams with his son Harry and Zach Mercury versus TJ Bratt, Robbie Royce, and Axe. This match is on YouTube. The match happened in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Harry was only 16 years old, and then Davey Boy dies from a heart attack on May 18th, 2002, at the age of 39 in England. And so there is our Davey Boy Smith stuff, John.
That makes a lot of sense why they mentioned him, because he's out of the hospital. He's in the full body cast at this point where we're at here. And so we're at the main event, No Mercy UK 99. And this is a weird show. And we did a lot of Davey Boy because there's not a lot about this show. There's not a lot going on in this show. And it's not WWE canon, but it is fun because it's basically essentially a house show with a lot of nice production, and they do a lot of calls to Davey here throughout the show. And this is obviously a lot of trial runs, which makes it fun. It's a glorified house show, and that's why we wanted to cover it here too.
It's sort of the Saudi shows before the Saudi shows.
I don't think that it's the same as the Saudi shows because they don't give you everything. And the reason that they don't really give you anything is because they're going back to Raw the day after this. They're flying back to Raw the very next day, and they got to tape Raw. So they don't even have half the roster here. At least they don't have them on the show.
Well, the counterpoint that I have here, though, is early Saudi shows.
Okay, gotcha.
So the Greatest Royal Rumble.
Yeah, not a lot of. Well, I mean, they only
Who knows what happened there?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't even remember other than Titus World Slide.
Right. Daniel Bryan somehow set a record that I guess they kind of kept in canon, maybe. But I feel like Daniel Bryan was in the ring for an hour and 9 minutes, which, do you know what I'm saying? And so that's what I mean there. And if you think about that first one, specifically the Greatest Royal Rumble, and that was what I was more so alluding to, is that match, and I would have to look back at the card, but I feel like it had Triple H and John Cena.
I think
so there were things there that were quote unquote big, but nothing happened.
Yeah, yes.
Whereas now, you know, we're trying to appease our Saudi prince a little bit better than, you know.
We absolutely are. And the other thing about this show is that they use No Mercy obviously turns into a yearly pay-per-view. It's the video game. There's seeds here for all of that. And the big thing I think about this show is he is specifically tied to Triple H because they put him in a main event match here. And I think that ties directly into what we see later on in 1999, where they actually give him the ball and they let it go. And I think it's because of how good of a job he was doing here in these shows, especially this one.
Well, what do they say? The bigger the baby face, the bigger the heel.
Yes.
And people forget, man, that Triple H in 1998 was the biggest deal. Him and The Rock for the IC belt. That was literally like your Bret Hart, Mr. Perfect feud.
Yes.
You know, that was your Bret Hart, Roddy Piper feud. That was your Macho Steamboat feud. That belt mattered so much. And then you look at who the players were. Obviously it did.
Yeah.
And I sort of think that was the idea here. Was
that makes a lot
Triple H was this big time baby face. When we turn him heel, to the moon.
Yes.
But he wasn't exactly as charismatic and everything as The Rock was.
No,
do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, not quite. Not at first.
He gets there. But it wasn't as quick as it was with old Dwayne.
Yes. Do you have the numbers for this show?
Here's what's crazy with this. I do, but I don't. So this was a show that took place in Manchester, England at the Nymex Arena. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. The crowd announced on air was 18,107 people, and Dave Meltzer defers the match ratings to another person.
I saw that. I was
Yeah,
gobsmacked.
and here's the thing, John. This is May 24th, 99 Observer issue. The show happened on May 16th. I don't think that you could have bought the show in the US.
I don't
And
think you
so
can either.
I think at this point in time, you had to literally wait until the DVD came out and go to FYE or Best Buy or Circuit City or Blockbuster and
Yes.
get it there. And
And
so
so to add to that, I don't think it ever came out on DVD until like 2010, 2013.
oh, okay.
Sure, that's what I read.
So then there you go. So that is why there is no, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle, is that the UK contingency must not have been what it may have been now.
Yes. And that's a great point because I noticed immediately that the show production, they didn't have all of the barricades, and the stage was up on a platform, or the ring, I mean, was up on a platform. There was some different elements that made it feel house showy, which is why I said that. And when you watch it, you see it, you're like, okay, yeah, this is not a true pay-per-view that we're seeing in America.
Well, and that sort of lends to what I was, and you watched it, I didn't.
Yeah.
So I do want to give full disclosure, but for me to give a sort of an allegory, that to me sounds like those first Saudi shows.
It does.
It does, where it was glorified house show, or the Starcade.
Yes, those started.
Like when they aired Starcade, like 2 matches or whatever on the network.
Yes.
It was a house show, and I sort of feel like that's what this was.
Yes. No, you're right. We get the corporate ministry right off the bat, and if you're playing a drinking game, you're going to get your money's worth out of it, because Shane says no mercy about 100,000 times, and it starts from the minute he comes out of the curtain until the end of the show. It is exhausting. They say it throughout the show. It starts with Shane saying he's going to give a no mercy. Their no mercy of destruction begins tonight with the Brood. There's no mercy for their souls. There's no mercy for everything. So he basically runs through the entire card, and he adds a special stipulation to the main event, which is no holds bars. He says no holds bars, but he meant to say no holds barred. So class.
Dude, no holds bars. No holds bars should be our tag team name.
Yes.
No holds bars.
Yes.
Teddy Mongoose and the Undermaker.
And so they have basically what they did, what we talked about last week on Raw. That's what Shane comes out and does. He does the Sean roll. He runs down the entire card of everything you're going to see tonight, which is completely ridiculous. We don't need any of it. The first match, though, is Tiger Ali Singh versus Gilbert. And I exploded because Gilbert is your lightweight champion. Jim Ross, though, as Tiger Ali Singh is coming to the ring, he says, we're going to see Tiger Ali Singh versus Goldberg. Now, I mean, Gilbert. So Gilbert was so good that he made JR forget it was a total rib.
And Dave says, Ross announced the match as Singh versus Goldberg, quote, by accident, end quote. When Gilbert came out, Ross says something to the effect of Goldberg, not much difference.
Yes, he literally said that on air.
Bless the child.
This match was super quick. Ali gets the win here, but the crowd popped enormously for the Gilbert spear.
I did want to note, though, that Dave said crowd wasn't into it, except they did pop when Gilbert hit the spear, which Singh sold. So
Yeah,
the fact that Singh sold that's awesome, man. That's really cool.
It was. Next, we had a 6-man tag match. It was the Acolytes and Viscera versus the Brood. I'm tired of Acolytes, man. I don't want to see them anymore. I know that we have so much more 99 to do, but they're wearing my ass out.
Bro, worse than this, when we get done with 99, we're going to go to 2004.
I know.
So we're gonna take one of them and we're gonna shave his mustache and put a cowboy hat on him. And he's gonna be the king of the mountain.
I know. I can't wait for that.
We go from bad to worse, brother.
So basically, Gangrel gets in and starts the match, and he does nothing for the rest of the match. It's basically Edge and Christian working. What is annoying, though, is that at the end, whenever Gangrel is in there and he's interfered with by the Ministry, he's thrown back into the ring and he's given a clothesline from hell by Bradshaw for the win, but the camera doesn't even show you the finish. I don't know what happened there, but you didn't even see the finish. They were showing the Ministry beat up Edge and Christian on the outside. So that was pretty annoying, but this match was there's so much going on in these matches, and it's like the same thing we've already said over and over again. Like, this is a Backlash basically rematch turned into a 6-man.
Here's the worst thing is that you couldn't make sense of it by, watching. Dave types, the finish saw Midian give Gangrel a DDT on the floor and throw him into the ring where Bradshaw pinned him with his clothesline. Look, man, I respect Dave Meltzer so much. I think that he is a great journalist. I think that he's wonderful at what he does. I think he's so important for wrestling history. But when you tell me that you can't make sense of what you watched, and then I have to read the finish saw Midian give Gangrel a DDT, like, what are we doing here?
Yes.
So word salad right up, obviously move salad finish. Oh, star 3/4 is what the contributor gave this one.
So it only gets worse from there. We get a Steve Blackman promo package, and then Steve Blackman comes out to the ring, which made no sense. So Steve Blackman comes out to the ring. He faces Draws, and this was a whole lot of nothing. They rolled around, did a whole lot of nothing for Blackman to win by an armbar. And dude, there was crickets. The crowd was so dead that there was air horns playing in the background. That's what took over the match.
So Blackman was supposed to turn heel, and we talk about things that we can't cover while we're going through things. One of them was possibly Steve Blackman turning heel. He did not. I guess he didn't, because Dave said he was no different character-wise than he was before. Not much heat, half star. 7 minutes and 53.
Yes.
7 minutes and 53 seconds.
7 minutes for them to end with an armbar. It was,
Look, man, I like a good armbar, but 7 minutes and 53 seconds with nobody reacting.
Yes.
That had to feel like 2 hours.
It did. It did.
That's the worst, though, is that when people don't care. Oh,
the air horns in the background was the name of the game for the match.
Yep.
So they run a beaver cleavage scene here again. We talked about that last week on Raw. They did it again here. And then they have the Mankind promo where he mentions Davey out in the ring. After that, we do Kane versus Midian. The crowd loves Kane. They went banana for Kane. But basically what happens here in this match is Kane chokeslams Midian pretty quickly, and then the Ministry interferes as soon as Kane goes for the win. X-Pac does run in to save his tag team partner, and basically there's no finish. They just ring the bell and they get their asses out of there.
Literally all I have is that Kane won via DQ in 436. Entire corporate ministry did a run in and 1/4 star. I wish I could see this UK Kane love, man.
Yes, I know. I wish we had better things to talk about this show. This is my favorite part of the show. I can't wait to talk about this because I have a nugget that is happening simultaneously with what is happening in the show right now. So Sable comes out with Nicole Bass and has a promo saying that she's not competing, but that Tori has to face Nicole Bass. Nicole Bass wins, but this is it. It's a nothing happening match, but this is what is so great that I can't wait to tell you because this is my nugget alert. Are you familiar with the X-Pac episode of the Steve Austin podcast?
Not at all.
Okay, so I'm going to play a clip here, but this is such an incredible story, and this is courtesy of Steve Austin's podcast, and this is Sean Waltman talking about what is happening currently backstage. As we talked about last show, Sable had heat with the boys, and she was on her way out, and this show was her last appearance, and X-Pac left her a nice little present while she was in the ring doing this promo.
We were at a pay-per-view in England, and okay, it was well known that was Sable and Mark's last day in with the company in general.
Right.
And they did the same ass thing. They hid their shit across the other side of the Wembley Arena. So we planned things out. There was a turd hidden in a cup this time, and somebody went on recon and found out the location of the luggage and everything. And I was at gorilla position, ready to go out for my match with Shane McMahon, like one of the top matches on the pay-per-view. And I said, I got to piss. And I fucking ran as hard as I could, Steve. I got the fucking cup, and then I ran to where they said all their stuff was, and I couldn't find it. And so I ran around a little bit, and the whole time I'm going, oh, fuck, anytime my music's playing. Finally, I found it. I made the deposit, and I fucking ran as fast as I could back to Gorilla. My music started playing. Boom, I walked through the curtain, went and had my fucking match, and somebody else got the blame for it. And she carried it all the way back and found it when they got home in Jacksonville through customs and everything.
So it got through customs.
Yeah, international shit smuggler.
Oh my God, Becky. Dude, wow. That's an ace. That's an ace. John, you had the nuts. You know what I'm saying? You were sitting there with Ace King, and then the flop came out, and it was whatever. I can't even think about cards right now. Jack Queen 10. You know what I mean? Like you nailed it.
That is so perfect, because literally the next match, he's not bullshitting, because literally Shane McMahon is backstage giving his promo, his music hits, and then X-Pac and Shane McMahon happens the very next match.
Decent match, but not close to their Mania match, Dave says. Yeah, I have it right here. Nicole Bass was 5th. Shane McMahon was 6th.
Yes.
So you ain't lying.
The Shane McMahon X-Pac match did not live up to their WrestleMania 15 match, but it was, they brought back the European title that they just retired, but they brought it back for one night.
I'm glad you brought that up, because Dave literally says, didn't McMahon retire the title on television? And that was never referred to again. The answer is yes, but for this show only, that interview never took place. And so, he notes that it was out of canon, but in canon, and hey, it is what it is.
2 more matches. We have the Mick Foley versus Billy Gunn match. Mick Foley is being interviewed backstage by Michael Cole. He is attacked by the Ministry, and then Billy Gunn's out in the ring waiting for Mick Foley to come out. Mick Foley does eventually get out there. This was pretty much nothing. A lot of Billy Gunn working on Mankind's knee. Mankind throws a chair into the ring, but Billy Gunn ends up hitting the Famouser on the chair, and Mick Foley loses, so Billy Gunn is starting his big singles push here.
Who'd have thought Billy Gunn beats Mankind in 99?
I know, it's wild. It is wild.
1.5 star.
So Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, they mentioned Davey Boy Smith, which is why we went the whole way back and did everything that we did on Davey Boy earlier in the show, because they made this a really big deal to put Davey up on the screen and really mention Davey here. So that is one of the reasons why we chose to do a lot of Davey today.
And he's no longer under WCW contract,
contrary to what I thought at the beginning of the show. So
this is why we talk, brother.
Yes. So the main event is every Stone Cold match that I've seen in the last month here. It is Stone Cold comes out of the curtain rushes to the ring. They brawl up to the stage. They brawl back to the ring. They brawl into the crowd. They brawl back to the ring. There's a ton of interference. And then Stone Cold hits a bunch of stunners. 1, 2, 3. I am kind of exhausted over the Stone Cold triple threat big main event. I know it's everything here in 99, but I've seen it 3 times now in the last month.
So here's what I say, John. Here's what I say. Stone Cold is Jon Moxley.
I know.
Guess who loves Jon Moxley?
We both do.
You should love Stone Cold.
I do love Stone Cold. I'm not saying I hate Stone Cold.
John,
I know it's I'm walking a line here.
because and the reason that I'm saying that is that you can watch, if you watch Dynamite week to week, you think, oh, I've seen this. Oh, I've seen this.
Yeah.
And then you see the Jon Moxley banger match on a Dynamite, on a pay-per-view, whatever. You're like, God, this guy's the greatest. And this really makes me think of like his title run.
Yes.
Do you remember his title run when every Dynamite or pay-per-view or whatever, he would cut a promo and tell you how he was going to win the match?
Yes.
And then he would do it?
Yes.
I sort of feel like this is Stone Cold here, where he'd be like, oh, hey, you bring your blah, 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 and I'm going to bring my blah, 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 and I'm going to blah, blah, blah. But like, he always comes out on top as the defiant, and Moxley might not have been as much of an anti-hero as Austin, but at the end of the day, there's still guys that don't follow rules, that brawl, that do all that. And to me, I feel like you are watching this getting tired the way that contemporary fans are literally tired of Moxley.
Yeah.
But then in 9 years, 10 years, 12 years, people will look back at Moxley and be like, dude, that guy was so good.
Yes, I know that's exactly what I'm going to do. I mean,
do you know what I'm saying? And I almost feel like you're getting Austin fatigue in live time because we're watching it so much. Do you know what I'm saying? But like, this guy matters so much that we're talking about him 25 years later.
I know. And that's the double-edged sword that I'm living on right now, is that like I love Austin so much, but it's like, damn, I've seen this like so many times. Can we do something a little bit different? I'd love it if they just stood in the ring and then hit a test of strength and then moved on from there.
And actually, so would I. However, the fella that contributed to that gave that match 3 stars, highest match rating of all of them.
Mm-hmm. It was
so
for sure.
Yeah, and so like if you think about it, Austin matches are all brawls. They are all 3 to 4 star matches, and they're all 12, 13, 15, 17 minutes in a time when every match is either way too short or way too long.
Yes.
And his never felt that way. My only complaint with Austin matches, which is my complaint with matches now, is I hate crowd brawling.
Yeah, the crowd brawling they did it a lot here. Like they always went up to the stage and they went to the ring, then they went down to the crowd, then they came back. Like that's what, like the formula is there and they stuck to the formula. The crowd brawling,
Yeah. And I've never liked it. And I triple hated it seeing it live.
Yeah.
Like, especially at Mania, like that 19 minutes that The Rock, etc. spent in the crowd. I had so many bad things to say about me looking at a spotlight when I couldn't see anything.
Yes.
And so, crowd brawling is the big thing with this time that I'm like, but you know what, man, I do want to remind you that you're watching something that is great. You just might not appreciate it because you are watching so much 99 and I'm only reading it. That's the thing, is I'm not watching, I'm only reading it. So if I was watching it, I'd probably be mother effing this the same way you are, dude.
Yeah, that is true. Well, that is the No Mercy UK show and the Davey show. And so next week, we are going to follow that up with Over the Edge 99, and that is Owen Hart's tragedy. And so, I mean, that's another Hart Foundation, more 99. There's a lot of stuff happening here. So we'll cover that next week on the show. We thank all of you for watching and listening. Make sure that you download, rate, review, and subscribe. Also, if you are a new subscriber, let us know in the comments below what you think of the show. If you watch the show, it is hard to find on Peacock. I will tell you that. It's just easier just to search in Google and take you to Peacock from there. But with that, We thank Teddy for all of the news and notes, and we will see you next time on the Podski.